No mai, haere mai, ki tēnei hui. I'll just say quickly a few words that this session is public and live streamed. However, immediately after, whenever we finish this, we won't be public and live streamed, and we'll be able to have a conversation about the issues that have been developing with Wellington Water. And obviously, the concerns that have been raised as a result of those reports are very much connected to the issues of reform, and so we won't be able to kind of do a clean break, and I expect it to come up in conversation today. However, those kind of detailed questions about specifically what is happening in Wellington Water with regards to those reports and our actions, we'll try and park those for the later sessions if we can, but recognising the connection between the two and the desire that people may wish to have comments on some of those matters. So I'm going to hand over to Andrea now.
Yeah, so probably just to echo some of the Chair's comments, but today's session is really focused on the consultation document that the regional team and our staff here have been working on. It's been a significant amount of work and in a changing environment. So I just wanted to firstly acknowledge Margot's leadership in this space. It's been pretty phenomenal, and she's been pulling out some late or long hours, I should say, as we've been thinking about some of these changes. So she's going to take you through the process that we've been through to prepare the CD and the process from here. So we're very much looking on the way forward for our water services delivery model today. However, just wanting to acknowledge, as the Chair has noted, significant media interest in the water reports and reflecting that you've got the summary of those reports only. The full reports haven't yet been made available. My understanding is that Wellington Water intends to make them or proactively release them on their website. There will be some redactions, and their intent in producing the summary was to ensure that they could get the clear messages out in a digestible form as soon as possible. That said, we need to take a very careful lens to this consultation document now to make sure that it says the things that we need it to say to give like a community who are interested in the right information to be able to participate in this consultation. So, for example, how will this new regional water services entity differ from Wellington Water? And we just need to be clear about that. So as you look at the consultation document when it's provided to you, I believe it'll be provided to you after the session, please take that lens, have a look at those kind of things, consider where we could strengthen that. We do bits and pieces, but we're running a tight deadline here. I note that you will have questions about the reports. We're here to answer as best we can, noting that this work was commissioned by Wellington Water, and we haven't necessarily been involved in that work. But what I would say is just a reflection of the genesis of the reports. You have for some time had some concerns about value for money in Wellington Water. You commissioned the Field Force report that gave you the information that highlighted some concerns. You requested in the Statement of Expectations for Wellington Water that a value for money report be done, and this value for money report has been done, and this has highlighted these concerns. So I just wanted to reinforce the work that you've done already to identify the issues and highlight the issues that have kind of come out as a result. Just to be very clear, the consultation document does and will have some numbers in it. That won't always be the final set of numbers that get used in the new water services entity. We are at a point in time and we're continuing to refine those numbers, and that will continue to refine as capital works are completed by Wellington Water, as we know their programs have been completed, as we start to look at the programs that are coming together in the priorities. All the detail of that goes in the Water Services Delivery Plan, and that's due on the 3rd of September. We do feel that we've done sufficient work in this consultation document to give a broad overview of what the differences are, but they're never going to be perfect at this point in time, and final numbers will only ever be decided until at the transition date. That said, as part of these reviews and the work that's been done, the Wellington Water Committee and the AOG have made it, well, it's actually the AOG, but, endorsed by many members of the Wellington Water Committee, have asked for additional work to be done on validating and checking those numbers before they go into the Water Services Delivery Plan. So that's a very clear course of action that has resulted in these reports. I note also that it's probably quite unsettling as governors at this point in time, because you've received these reports and it highlights some pretty stark findings. And I want to give you some assurance that internally we feel that our own house is in order. We certainly review things as part of our external audits. We have a solid internal audit program in place, and in fact the internal audit program that was signed off by the Audit and Risk Committee has a project in looking at our contract management. So that's, that's already been factored into our work program. It's not something we're introducing. It's part of the robustness of our risk and assurance process. But we also, as staff and your, principal advisors, will be pulling together a wee bit of information for you in the future, so that we can just give you assurance that we've got similar contracts or undertakings that were in place at Wellington Water, just how we're managing them and the robustness of the processes that we've got around that. So we'll provide that to you in due course as well. So look, that's enough from me. I just wanted to provide those opening remarks, and I'll hand over to Margot.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you for your time this morning. This is, for those of us working on this program, this is a pretty exciting and important point of the work to date, to get to the point where we're starting to share with you the conversation we want to have with our community. So for us, we're quite keen to have this conversation with you, but also to both the Chair and Andrea's points, we acknowledge that you have a number of other things that are probably top of mind for you at the moment. So throughout this presentation, I will do my best to be incredibly selfish and to keep our conversation on the consultation document and the consultation process that we're about to embark on. So hopefully that goes well. Here we go. So in terms of the session this morning, what we're looking to do is to share the draft or the beginnings of the draft document, which, as has been indicated, will be with you at the end of this session. What we're looking to do is seek your feedback on the document, not just from today, but through to the end of the week, on the fit for purpose for the conversation with the community. So understanding, it would be good to get an understanding from you whether we think the document is accessible in its language in terms of how we explain what is actually a very complex story. The survey question that we ask in consultation is important, and so I will share with you what the draft question is, and then what I would be keen to know is whether you're looking for any additional supplementary questions to support that. And just in terms of a timeline, just so you don't think you've only got today, what we would like to do is to give you until the end of Friday to provide your feedback to us so that we can accommodate any changes that fit with the overall direction, and we can make sure that those are incorporated in the papers that are published for committee meeting, and they will be published early next week. And just to reiterate, what we're looking to achieve here with this consultation document is a document that helps our community to understand what's happening in the world of water reform and to make an informed submission should they choose to. So that's what we're talking about. And just to reiterate as well that our consultation is on the delivery model. So it's which delivery model do we think, we the community, think will serve us best in the future. So it's not about whether we want water meters, whether we think there should be a new board or a shareholding agreement of any particular type. This is about the delivery model that best fits our needs for the future. So as you know, the world of water reform, it is a complex story, not just because understanding how water works in our region, but also the relationship with the other councils, so currently with the other 5 councils, the relationship with Wellington Water, and then the incoming legislation. So that provides us a lot of uncertainty in terms of how do we talk about the future? How do we talk about governance? Because we have the draft legislation, and that's still, as we believe, still a few months away from being enacted. So what we'll discuss today and what you will receive after this is a version of the document of where we've landed with coordination, collaboration with the other councils. So it is open to enhancement and improvement, but what is important is that we aimed for a consistent story with the other councils, especially where we're talking about joint options, because how we talk about those does need to have an element of consistency so that our residents, respectively around the region, are getting the same story. And just to be clear, given the events that have happened this week, we haven't made any changes to the modelling in the document as a result of this week. One, there just hasn't been the time, and two, there is still quite some, I was going to say water to go under the bridge, inappropriate. There is still some effort to go in to understand next steps, actions and responsibilities with those. So what you are seeing is essentially pre the release of any reports. So in terms of today, look, what we'll do, appreciate there's probably going to be quite a few questions. So what we'd like to do is to take this in stages. So we'll step you through just a bit of a context and overview and set the scene. We do have some prescriptive requirements of what we must include in consultation. And also just to remind you how we've gone about this with the other councils. And so we can, at that point, look to pause, take any questions as relevant to what we've just talked about. We'll then move in to talk about the comparison of the 3 options that we're consulting on, and you would have received an email with a summary of those options. We've also have a handout when we get to that point as well, so that you don't have to look at the screen. So we'll take you through the comparison of the 3 options, and again, pause, ask for questions, and then we'll step into looking at the question and any supplementary questions. So if that's okay, we'd like to just work progressively.
Yeah, I do have a few questions now, so we'll just pause quickly and hopefully not too many, but I have one which is just about this process that I'm assuming councillor feedback you'll sort of take under advisement. So just because you make a suggestion which is an edit, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will see that in the final document. It'll be based on the cohesion of the whole and your advice on those.
Yes, and when I get to, I think it's the last slide, just so you don't think the chair and I are in cahoots, yes, that is absolutely what I say. But it's,
I have not seen that slide, I just want to say.
Look, I anticipate that in your feedback there's probably going to be conflicting feedback,
yes.
And that's okay. What we will need to do is to make a decision as to how we incorporate feedback, and my intent would be to work with you and let you know if we're not going to include it for whatever reason, is to make sure you're aware of that. That's just simply what we do need to be mindful of, again, and just keep reiterating, is that consistency of story and making sure that we're telling a coherent story to our community.
And just to remind people about the timeline, so papers will go out early mid next week, and for the decision to be made at committee on Tuesday the 18th.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Councillor Brown, you had a question.
Yeah, I'm stunned actually that we are obliged to actually provide you with feedback on what we see today by Friday. This is our most important decision in many ways as a council, and I think 2 days is completely inappropriate.
Councillor, we will also be making a decision on papers at committee.
I understand that.
So this is a prior step put in to try and get your feedback before. So we could still amend the document at committee, and you will have it with you for a week before committee.
Okay.
Is that reassuring to you? This is an additional step which we probably wouldn't normally take.
Okay, I get.
All right, I'll let you finish. I'm sorry I jumped.
I just feel that I understand that this is a process where there are all sorts of obligations, but I really do feel as if we're being shoehorned into something with this sort of timeline that we have in front of us at the moment, given the importance of this matter. But
look, I appreciate your perspective, Councillor. I think the really important thing here is we are working to a legislative deadline of the 3rd of September, and that is when we have to have our water services delivery plan completed by. As part of this, what we're trying to do is prioritise the feedback that we can get from our community, so having the right timeframes for our community to have a view on this as well and to work through that process. So as with everything in local government, it is always kind of driven by a statutory deadline, and we need to be cognisant of that and work towards those deadlines.
I also think we need to remember that we have had workshops and other discussions about this, including, a reasonably kind of fulsome discussion about our preferred option at the end of last year. Is that any other questions from you? Councillor Pennant.
Thank you for the work that you've done, and I appreciate that you have had very tight timelines since Monday. And I'm treading carefully, and we'll raise it later, but I do think, and it's important this is raised publicly, that we recognise there are extremely serious problems. And if we go into another discussion about what to do, and we haven't recognised the numerous problems, how are we going to give the public confidence that we won't get another set of problems? There have been people who were appointed to run these mega entities who have caused the problems we've got at the moment. So could you just talk that through, and then I'm sure we'll have a more detailed discussion before, but we have to be open about this.
Yeah, look, I think we will discuss this later, but what I would say is the reports that the summary reports that you've seen and that have been publicly released highlight a number of really concerning issues, right? But those concerning issues were also outlined in the Field Force report and other concerns that you had raised. So this, while it's new information, the information here is not entirely new. You had concerns, and there were many concerns expressed around this table. So that is why we have been so active in progressing this model in taking this forward and making sure we address those concerns. So we're not starting from a clean slate as of Monday when 2 reports came out. We have been working towards many of the concerns that we have identified previously and looking at what is the best thing to do for the future model, and that has been included in papers that have provided to you for previous decisions. But I get the concerns that you have in the current reports as well and how they're addressed.
It's potential as well. Some of your questions will be asked when you see the consultation document. Yeah. All right. Okay. We've got no more questions at the moment. So back to you, Margot. Sorry for that pit stop.
No, all good. All good. Okay. So consultation is being undertaken under the Local Government Water Services Preliminary Arrangements Act. So it's not being undertaken under the LGA. So I thought it was important just to reiterate, because it's quite different, what we are required to consult on, and just to give you clarification. So we must consult at least once. Okay, we may consult more if we choose, but I do ask you to think about that, because as Andrea's pointed out, the 3rd of September is not that far away. So the more we consult, the more at risk that date is. So, but we must undertake consultation once. We must identify 2 options. The first option being remaining with the existing approach, which we have been loosely referring to status quo, but the terminology is existing approach. And as it says in the Act, an option for establishing, joining and amending a water services CCO, which is now being referred to as a water organisation. Okay, but we may also identify additional options. So we have 3 options going out. It just happens that 2 of them are a CCO as a regional and a go alone. When we consult, we must make certain information publicly available, and that is what's in our consultation document. So that includes how proceeding with the proposal, i.e. the preferred arrangement, is likely to affect authorities' rates, debt, levels of service, and any water services charges. So we have articulated a response to each of those for each of the 3 options that we are consulting on. And if the preferred option involves transferring ownership or control of a strategic asset, we must also talk about the accountability and monitoring arrangements that we will use to assess performance of the water organisation. So again, the consultation does talk to that, it will address that. And then, as we say that last point, any other relevant information that you as the authority considers will be of interest to the public. Okay, so that might be an area where you choose to give us feedback on. I would suggest also when you think about that is thinking about the other communities. As we talk about our community is mobile across the region, and so we might want to think about any information as people move between Porirua, Lower Hutt, Wellington City. So that's what we're required to consult on. In terms of the approach we've taken working with the other 4 councils, we have worked hard to ensure we've got a consistent story. So how we talk about a multi-council water organisation is consistent. How we talk about the existing arrangements is consistent, because we need to make sure people understand we're talking about the same thing. That's not to say that each authority or each council can't add some local flavour. Absolutely you can. But we do want to achieve a base level of consistency. The other thing we are striving to do is to tell a coherent story that is easy to understand. So when we're talking about debt levels, when we're talking about debt to ratio, when we're talking about economies of scale, all of those words that are probably quite familiar to the likes of yourselves and ourselves, we need to make sure we've used plain English or at least provided a glossary, which we have. So really trying to help our community work through what this all means, and that really important what's in it for me. Our water story is complex, so it's not just what's been happening this week, but how we've got to where we are today is complex. There is history around that, but also thinking about the future of water is complicated. If we think about climate change, if we're thinking about ensuring we've got a resilient water network, it's complicated. We need to help the community understand that it is complicated, but it can be understood. So that's what we'd really ask you to look for in the document. Have we done enough to help your community understand that story? And just as I've already mentioned this morning, we just do need to keep top of mind that what we're asking the community is which delivery model best suits our future needs. So, as I say, it's not about water meters or any other particular individual point. Whilst there might be feedback and community concerns and questions about that, that's absolutely valid. But ultimately, what we're looking to understand is what is the best delivery model. Okay, so in terms of the actual document itself, so that will be with you, will be emailed to you when we finish up here. I believe what you've already been sent as well, as I mentioned, is the options table, which we will talk through. The consultation document essentially is written in 2 parts. So part A is the scene setter. So it has the key information that talks about why we're consulting and why now. It gives an overview of the government's local water done well reforms to understand the context of why we're doing it now, and also understand the context of the range of options we're providing to the community. That front section also talks about the 3 options that we will be talking to them about, and gives a brief overview of them, which is our preferred option, and more, of course, quite importantly, how to provide feedback. So, and that doesn't change from any other consultation that we have undertaken or are undertaking. So hard copy submission, online submission, can choose to speak to your submission, etc., etc. So there are a number of ways, and that's just using our normal council approach. There is nothing different that we're undertaking for water. The second part of the document is probably got the meat of the bones on it. So that's where we really delve into the options. That's where we talk about and provide the community with a side-by-side comparison. So we've used 12 criteria to lay out those differences so that people can see the difference in particular between going into a multi-council arrangement regionally and also going and entering into a WCC sole ownership CCO. So because those two options are talking about establishing a water organisation, a lot of the criteria is the same. So for our community, there may be a case of, well, what's different? So we have really worked to provide some key differences around operational arrangements in particular that would need to be considered as we work through those. And then, of course, the submission form will include the survey question or questions, plural, if you choose to have supplementary questions. So the next part of this workshop would be to take you into the options comparison. So before we delve into detail, just wanted to check if there are any questions or clarification needed.
Councillor Rogers.
So just when we're submitting feedback, is that something that is informing the joint approach across the region, or is that something that's informing just our consultation document?
It would most likely be informing just ours. It may be something that would be useful for other councils to consider in theirs. What we are aware of is that either already or sometime today, Hutt City Council are publishing their meeting papers with their consultation document. So it may not meet the other councils' timeframes, but if we think it's something that would be beneficial, and with your approval, we would send it on.
Thank you.
Poiwi. I was just thinking, if this comes back, once the consultation is finished, and if it comes back, and the ratepayers say they don't want to join in with the others, what happens then?
Oh, then that is a decision that would be your decision to make. So the advice that we will provide back to you post-consultation will be a summary of the an analysis of the submissions. Will also include relevant submissions made to other councils in relation to perhaps joining in with other councils. But that is ultimately your decision to make. If that is what's best for the community, then that would be the decision that we would then use to develop up the water services delivery plan that we'd submit to DIA.
So can you just clarify, are you saying that when you do the analysis that would be included in the other councils' consultation documents as well? So it means that what comes back to us will also include what the other cities have.
A summary at least. It may not include thousands of pieces or thousands of submissions, but at least a summary. So what each of the councils are looking to do is share with you where the other communities have landed. So overwhelmingly yes, overwhelmingly no, or somewhere in between.
So not necessarily that's going to be the position of Wellington City Council.
No, no.
Thank you. Councillor Poutū-te-rangi.
A bit of clarification on what you said. Are you saying, example, if people in Pararoa, let's say 100 people says they want the new model, and say 50 people from Wellington says the old model, you are saying 150 people fed back into the consultation, 100 of them support, 50 against?
I'm assuming we'll have analysis which is Wellington City specific. Yeah. Thank you, Councillor.
Can I just also note that you don't need to, in informing your decisions, you don't need to take the outcome of the pros and cons. You need to make a fully informed decision with all of the information that has been provided to you. as part of the consultation. It's not weighted based on numbers. It is weighted based on the information and the best decision that you think you want to make for this council.
But to clarify my question, Margot, we will have separately the feedback that we get from Wellingtonians to our consultation document, plus some level of summary about what residents from other authorities.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Abdurrahman, do you have another question?
So our one is also a separate summary and then the general altogether as well.
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
thank
yeah.
you. Yep.
There any more questions before we move on? Beautiful. Thank you, Margot.
So Tiana's now handing out hopefully a more readable version for you rather than what's on screen. So this is the comparison of each of the three options. So this is what I would like to step you through to understand how we are proposing to talk about the three options in the consultation document. Understanding that there is a lot more that we could say, but at the same time of saying a lot more, we don't want a 200-page consultation document. So there is a balance to achieve of providing enough without overwhelming our community with technical information. I'll just pause until you receive those.
Oh, it's in your email as well. Oh, Councillor McNulty, do you have a question now?
It's about the table, but maybe I'll let them work through it before I come to it.
Okay, I'll put you on the list.
Okay. Okay.
Rebecca, I have a quick question.
Oh, yes, Councillor Free. Sorry, I just had a list of who was online.
It's
I
okay.
didn't see that you were there.
Yeah. No, I was a bit late joining,
No,
but I
I
didn't
know.
miss anything.
Off you go, Sarah.
So my question really is option 3 even an option? I understood that we couldn't actually keep the status quo and even modifying it and keeping the assets. I didn't think that was even on the table.
Thank you, Councillor. So it is an option, and also just to reiterate, you may have missed this part earlier, under the legislation we are required to consult on current arrangements or status quo. So that is a minimum requirement that we have to include.
Okay, I did hear that bit, but
Okay.
I maybe I just didn't understand quite that this is what it meant. Thank you.
Okay, so right, let's go. So the first criteria is ownership of the organisation. So clarifying that under option 1, which is the multi-council organisation, and option 2. Oh, sorry, I was talking about assets. Let me start again. Sorry. The ownership of the organisation, the multi-council organisation would be owned by the shareholding council. So that is the 5 councils. For the go alone option, spot the obvious, that will be owned by Wellington City Council as the sole owner. And that's how we largely have articulated this option throughout the document, is sole ownership, just to try and really differentiate between the two. And then, of course, as we know, current arrangements with the individual 6 councils with Wellington Water. Asset ownership, so for any of the two, option 1 and option 2, assets will be transferred to the new organisation. So that is a requirement, and that's what we would look to do. Under option 3, as we know, assets are owned by the individual councils. When we're talking about assets, we are talking about, so often we talk about the pipes, but we just have tried to make it clear for the community that there's a lot more to it than just the pipes. So we're talking about reservoirs, pump stations, wastewater treatment plants. So it's the lot, okay? Thinking about governance and the board, so each of the CCO options would have a board appointed. The multi-council option, that would be a board appointment as a decision made by the shareholding councils with iwi joining on an oversight group. So the details around this we really aren't able to be much more clear about, and that is because the draft legislation has some provisions in it that we've sought clarity on. So we're not sure quite where that will land. So as much as we would love to say that a board must have X, Y, Z, and that's different to what it is today, we just aren't in a position to do that. Under the sole ownership, the decision around the board appointment would be a council with iwi representation, and again, same rules apply around the legislation not giving us enough clarity to provide more guidance on that. What we've provided is links to the DIA website to allow our residents to go and look for more information on that legislation and get an overview of that if they so choose. What we think is probably quite an important factor is decisions around how money is spent in the new network. So how are those decisions being made? So for the multi-council option, the board will make those decisions, and that will be with a sole statement of expectations from the shareholding councils. So similar to what we do today. So a statement of expectations is issued from the shareholding councils to the board, and in response, the board then prepare a water services strategy and provide that back to the shareholding councils. Legislation isn't quite clear. Previous policy advice said that the strategy was provided back for comment. The legislation is pointing to there may be an approval role there for the shareholding councils. So we're not quite sure how that will land. So very similar under the go alone sole ownership option. So setting out the statement of expectations and the development of a water services strategy. What's important across all three options is that with the stricter regulations coming in and the role of the Commerce Commission in particular, so that's also will have a large part to play in how decisions are made and what some of the focus needs to be on, and also around affordability and customer focus. Okay. Debt capacity. So option one, multi-council, under the arrangements with the LGFA, so there are agreed higher debt limits available to a CCO, and that means that it enables significant increased borrowing. Sorry, yes. And that same arrangement exists for option two, the sole ownership, because we're talking about establishing a CCO. The difference between those two options and our current arrangements is different. The greater or increased borrowing arrangements that's made available under the LGFA is not available under the status quo option 3. So that is something that we've tried to articulate there. So the question would be whether we've made that understandable enough for the community. Water services charges. So really important for our community to understand that going forward, under both the preferred option and the sole ownership option, water services will be removed from council rates. So individuals will no longer receive water bills from council, and instead they will receive a water bill from the new entity, whether that is the multi-council or the sole ownership entity. Just in the interim, because some of the thinking we've done around transitioning to, in particular, a multi-council option, there may need to be an interim arrangement in place where, whilst we're saying that this is what the end state will be, there may be a period of, I'm going to make it up, 6 months, 12 months, where council is still issuing water charges on behalf of the new entity whilst it's stood up. So we have tried to make that clear, because one of the topics in the consultation document is we need to make clear around changes to levels of service. So we just want to provide clarity that that may be a little bit of an influx arrangement. If we were to stay with the current arrangements, the modified Wellington Water arrangements, so water services would continue to be invoiced and paid through council rates. Okay. Cost to customers. So to Andrea's earlier point, the numbers that are included, the modelling that's included in the consultation document is indicative, and it's using the best available information at this time. So based on our modelling, we think by 2034, so 10 years, the preferred option will mean an average reduction in under the preferred option of around 20%. So it'll be less costly by about 20% over and above the current arrangements, the status quo. Okay. The go-alone option is not quite as attractive as that, but it's also cheaper than the modified option. And so those are articulated in the document. What is important, though, is that these numbers are indicative. Okay, and there is further work needed to work through those and to be able to land on anything. And it's also important to note that water services charges would come under the remit of the new board. So what we put in, what we include in our water services delivery plan when we submit it to DIA could change under the new board once that entity is stood up. Okay. Customer inquiries. So at the moment, as you know, customers typically phone council, but they can also engage with Wellington Water. So under the multi-council entity, customers would go direct to the new entity. The same arrangements would be in place for the sole ownership option as well. Water meters. We've had quite a few conversations with you around water meters, and we also know in our long-term plan at present is the intent to implement water meters, or certainly do the investigation, and there is funding in the LTP for implementation of water meters. So this is not a new conversation, but what we are saying across all three options, that it is highly likely that water meters will be introduced. There is no set time frame, but that is not a differentiator across the three options, but we think it's important to make that visible to the community. I mentioned earlier that we've tried to articulate some of the key differences across the options, in particular the regional multi-council option and the go alone. So this is where we think that some of the key differences really are. And we've articulated them as operational difference. So these are what is different from today, with the exception of the new regulatory changes that are coming in. So under the multi-council option, the shared infrastructure ownership so where we've got shared infrastructure, say for example the Poutū-te-rangi wastewater treatment plant, we co-own that with Poutū-te-rangi City Council. Both of those councils would look to transfer that asset to the new entity, so that would be under sole ownership of the new entity. Under a sole owned entity, we would need to negotiate new contracts with, assuming a new entity made up by the other councils, for key services such as bulk water supply and, for example, the Poutū-te-rangi wastewater treatment plant. So we would need to enter into those arrangements, and we would need to make sure that there was sufficient provision for protection for our community. We'd also need to make sure that we have enough in those contracts to make sure that we are happy, that we could monitor performance, and that we could get the outcomes that we are ultimately looking for. And under the existing option 3, we would continue with current arrangements. So we think that is quite an important factor for our community to understand about what would be different across option 1 and option 2. The next criteria is around implementation and establishment. So for the multi-council option, option 1, we are working to an assumed establishment date of 1 July 2026. With that, Wellington Water will be disestablished. Not exactly on that date, because as a company they still have some company obligations they need to complete, but that organisation will be disestablished. The current intent is for Wellington Water specialist and technical staff to transfer to the new entity, because we need to make sure that water services can continue regardless of ownership changing from Sunday midnight to 12:01 on a Monday. So we need to make sure our water service supply is still in place. So we do need that technical resource to be available. And of course, to set up a new entity isn't an easy exercise, nor is it free. So there would be transition and establishment costs associated with that option. Under option 2, a sole ownership option, we are working on an estimated establishment date of no earlier than 1 July 2027. So we are working on the fact that that will be about a year later. In doing that, Council would look to exit from the Wellington Water shareholder agreement. Now, we've put that in there. If the other councils progress with the July 2026 arrangement, then we need to work through what that looks like. But what we're trying to articulate here is, should the Wellington Water entity still be in place with the shareholding councils at that time for 2027, we would look to exit from that arrangement because we would be going out on our own. So this one's a little bit messy in terms of how we articulate it, because it also depends on what the other councils are doing. But if you have any suggestions on a better way to articulate that, very happy to hear that. So Council would fund all transition and establishment costs, as opposed to under option 1, it would be funding a proportion of that. To set up a new water organisation and make sure there is sufficient capability and, more importantly, the right capability in place, we would need to either recruit that capability or contract that capability to make sure we have said water engineers, and apologies to all those technical people, I don't know the correct terms, but the people that keep it all humming for us. And in addition to that, obviously establish the legal entity and make sure we have a board, make sure we have a chief executive, a leadership team, make sure that they have IT systems, make sure they have an office premises, all of the things that go with establishing a new organisation. Okay. None of that is required for status quo option 3, because we have it there. However, we know that the current arrangements with Wellington Water and their IT systems require attention. So we know that there is work needed. So if we were to stay with no change, there is still work required to strengthen those systems. And the last criteria around population growth, so just articulating how each of those options would support and enable population growth. So option 1 will improve, we believe it will improve the ability to meet the growth through the greater borrowing capability. Same for a sole ownership option, and then because of our funding constraints under the current arrangements, we believe that would be far more constrained. Good news is I can stop talking for a moment.
There are a lot of questions. Okay. And I just want to, because we have quite a few councillors online, if you've got questions online, could you raise your hand online and we will put you on the list. Councillor McNulty, you're first.
Yeah, 2 questions. In debt capacity, obviously we've used the same answer under preferred and going it alone. I'm wondering why we just haven't put some little qualifier that says it is assumed that the LGFA may have different views around the ability of Wellington City versus Wellington City and partners, just because it sort of makes it sound like there's no difference when we know in practicality there's probably going to be a different negotiating position if we're in there regionally.
Look, we're happy to take that feedback, Councillor. I think we have to take care to not make this too technical, but at the same time not preempt what the view of the LGFA might be. So we could happily. So what we'll have an association with this is a set of FAQs. So that might be something we could put in an FAQ as well, maybe.
Okay. Yep. I'm sending this in an email, but it seems like a glaring omission from the table is accountability. Mm-hmm. So at the moment, councillors exercise more control in the modified status quo. Under both option 1 and 2, councillors will exercise less control, but you'll have more stakeholders in the preferred regional option, so you take into account recent events where there's a lot of discrepancy about how we should handle these reports. So I think I'll send you an email with some ideas there, but I think that's a glaring omission that we need to make people aware of, that there is less accountability in the new model from councillors, and that is by design. But yeah, I've got some ideas rather than putting it in.
Thank you for emailing them through. That would be great. Just in response to that, I think this is one of the challenging areas we've got when articulating around accountability in the board, is just the legislation, the draft legislation and where it's at really isn't providing us with a lot of clarity on how to talk to that. The policy advice that was available last year, under that advice, Councillor, I would have said exactly that, that you would have less control, less authority. The draft legislation doesn't necessarily align with that. So we can't be definitive. So there could be control and accountability, but it depends where that lands. So, but leave that with me. We'll think through how to articulate that and how to draw that out. Yep, thank you.
Can I just also note that this table is only one part of the consultation document, so we're just showing this to you as a summary. There'll be other aspects of the consultation document which we can tell a bit more of a narrative around some of these things, and that may also be included already. So hence why we want to leave some time for you to actually sit down and engage with the document, not just take your feedback from just this.
All right, and sorry, I should, because I've got a reasonable list of questions, so we'll keep them to 3 each, and as always, asked through me. Councillor Pannett.
Thank you. The costs, is in the document, does it actually say what people are going to be paying? Because a percentage doesn't actually give much. And the second question is, again, I raise my concerns about saying, oh, it's going to cost you more money when we've just been told that we've been overcharged. And then I'll ask my third question.
So just on the last one, Councillor. So yes, the events of this week and the reports doesn't help us tell an easy story. So we are having to think through how we can do that. The modelling that we have done does have efficiencies, so cost savings built in. So we are anticipating that over the 10 years there would naturally be cost savings. So to a certain degree, for the purposes of consultation, they could look to net off, not in entirety, because there would still be additional cost savings. So we know that the costs that are included in the modelling will be less because of the overcharging situation. So we know it will be less, but to meet our consultation timeframes, we're not going to be in a position to remodel. And even then, we don't know if there would be enough assurance around the Wellington Water numbers to give greater confidence in the consultation document. So, yeah.
That's kind of alarming as well. My third question is when you look at the difference between the multi-unit one and the single one, it doesn't actually look like there's much difference. So I guess my question then is, how are we going to explain why we've got one preferred option, particularly, again, given the issues which have been raised?
Thank you. And yes, so in the table that isn't that isn't drawn out. In the other parts of the document, it is drawn out about why option 1 is the preferred option, and that really is around, because our water network currently is connected. We share infrastructure, we take our water source from the Hutt River, and so by breaking those arrangements, we add in extra complexities and extra cost to our community that we really are trying to avoid. So, but to your point, Councillor, between option 1 and option 2, on the face of it, there isn't a lot of difference, because we're talking about setting up a CCO for both options, and the requirements and our legislative environment that we're working to for a CCO is the same for both.
Poe Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are not really about adding to the consultation document. They're more about clarity for myself. And my first question is around charging for the water services, and how in option 1, the water services will be removed from the council rates, and the new organisation will bill property owners separately, and then it says something similar for option 2 as well. So can you tell me, will Greater Wellington Regional Council still exist then?
Yes, Greater Wellington Council will still exist, yes.
Okay. It just seems that, actually I won't go into that, but yeah.
You intrigue me, Councillor, but okay.
Well, yeah, I know they do, but anyway, won't go there for that one, for this one. And then the second one is about operational differences and how the shared infrastructure ownership would transfer to the new water organisation as the sole owner, or they would negotiate, or the other one is negotiate. How will that happen? So I'm thinking of like the wastewater. How will that? Oh no, actually, yes, it's because everybody's all going to be together.
Correct.
So it will then be owned by everybody rather than Wellington and Poutū-te-rangi.
Yes, and so because each council is transferring their assets, or even if it's a part ownership of an asset, that ownership is transferred.
So the 5 councils would then own the wastewater plant.
Correct.
Answered my own question. Thank you, though.
I'm glad I could be of assistance.
Just so you know, Councillor Free, I have you at the end. I have you on my list, but it's near the end, so just do you know that I have got you there. Councillor Abdurrahman.
Kia ora, Margot. If the go alone option is cheaper than the modified one, and if the new option is 20% cheaper than the modified one, how much cheaper would it be under the go alone before 2034? And you said after 2034 it will be a slight increase. Since you modeled it, what that slight increase looks like and by how much?
So the water services delivery plan that we will submit for September requires us to model for over 10 years, and so that's why we've used that time frame, just to provide that for clarity. So we haven't done projections further out than that. So, but also recognising that should there be a transfer of ownership and revenue and et cetera to a new entity of a description, those decisions are taken by the board of that new entity. So we cannot predict and anticipate what their decisions might be. So we've modelled what we think would be best based on the investment programs needed for each council area. The consultation document will provide that information. And so the consultation document does give you that greater breakdown. So we'll let you have a look at that, and then we can catch up together if you'd like to go into that some more.
Through you, Madam Chair. So does that mean before 2034, the price would be less cheaper or still the same or more expensive compared to the new entity? That's my question.
For which option, Councillor?
For the go-alone option, before 2034.
So the go-alone, in terms of charges, is the middle option. So it's it's less expensive than the modified option 3, but it is more expensive than the preferred option 1. So it is the middle of the 3.
One more question, Madam Chair. Regards to the operation where you said shared infrastructure ownership, what kind of infrastructure example from our side we're sharing and the equity being raised previously, and could you give us an example from our side?
For like what we've articulated there, the Poutū-te-rangi wastewater treatment plant, where we have shared ownership with Poutū-te-rangi City Council.
Okay, that's the only one. That's an example, though.
Off the top of my head, I have asked just to clarify that, but again, just trying to keep it relatively accessible for our community, but we do need to make sure that we've made that clear. But we also need to think about the water supply as well. Whilst that's not a shared ownership, it is also a key factor we need to consider about a sole ownership option.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Foon.
Yeah, kia ora, thanks for the work. So probably just, I think, one of the reasons why we've talked about this local water done well is the whole procurement aspect. So my ask is, that over time when we're procuring en masse, we're going to get a better outcome for everybody. And I guess my question is, do you think that's clear enough in that bottom section there? But I'll email that through. But my question is, in the consultation document, is there a linear map or graph to articulate what Councillor Abdurrahman is saying, as well as, to demonstrate what we might expect in the future given particular scenarios?
Yes, there is, but welcome your feedback on whether you think that is sufficient for our communities. So this is one of those instances where you live in the detail so much that what you think is obvious isn't necessarily to people who aren't living in the detail. So it would be a good test for once you see it to give us that feedback.
One more question, Chair. Water meters, just wanting to know if there's an explanation in the consultation document on the why, where we're at in the process.
There isn't, and that's intentional, because if I come back to the purpose of the consultation document is to get a decision or get feedback, and community feedback around the delivery model. Water meters do not influence that, because we're saying that water is highly likely to be present in all three. What we can do, though, is include in the FAQs as an explainer, or maybe even a one-pager on water meters to your point, Deputy Mayor, where we're up to, where it's at, what's been provisioned.
That would be appreciated. Thank you.
Councillor Rogers.
Yeah, I just noticed that even in this document we're using the terms organisation and company interchangeably, and I was just wondering if we could continue the DIA organisation.
Yes, I've tried to pick them up, but I had spotted I'd missed a couple, so thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for paying attention. Yes.
So nerdy. Councillor Brown.
Thanks. In terms of this point about the standalone entity being potentially more expensive, is there any modelling of ring fencing costs between the TLAs that are going to be potentially part of the amalgamated entity? For instance, I'm aware that Wellington City's network leaks apparently 20% of its water, whereas Upper Hutt's leaks roughly 40% of its water. So clearly they've got a great deal more remediation work to do than we do. Will they end up being charged more for that? And did this particular modelling around the standalone being more expensive take that into account?
So the approach that we've taken around the investment is each council has its own investment program, and so the water services charges are then derived from that. So you're not going to find Wellington City ratepayers under this modelling will not be paying for things like the remediation work around the Seaview plant. So yes, they will be. I don't want to use the word ring fence, because under legislation that means something else, but in the intent of how you meant it, Councillor, yes, it is ring fenced.
Councillor Randall.
Just want to first note Councillor McNulty's comment about accountability. I think we do need, it'd be really good to see a line across the accountability comparison between the options. I mean, even if they're the same, I think we just need to focus on that. Noting the establishment that option 1 gets to take over the Wellington Water Specialist staff, but option 2 doesn't. Is there any reason why, if the Wellington City Council decided to go it alone, that we wouldn't get a share of the current specialist staff that are already servicing our network?
That's a tricky one in terms of what comes out of the decisions post-consultation and where it all ends up. I think if we end up going alone and the other councils go ahead, we've got to then have that conversation about what happens to Wellington Water staff. I don't think there's an answer to that yet, because there's going to need to be some careful thought about that. But it does speak the question of resource availability and capacity and capability in the region for different models. But I think it's something I'm going to have to work through, Councillor.
Yeah, because I think that's one of the notable differences between the options, and I'm not sure if it's justified.
Yeah.
And if you don't know, you shouldn't say this what it's going to be to the public. In terms of the establishment costs, can we know what the different assumed establishment costs are between option 1 and option 2?
Sorry?
The establishment costs, how much it's going to cost us? You know, is it 50 million, 100 million?
We do have some estimates, yes, but...
And that will be in the document?
No, because that is not part of the conversation we're looking to have. They have been factored into the modelling, but we're not explicitly calling that out.
Okay. And I guess the other thing is, well, the modelling that shows that the costs will go down, which is a surprise to me, given the scary stories we heard in the earlier workshops, will that be able to be shared?
So when you say costs will go down...
Well, it says the relative costs.
Yeah.
They're all going to go up, but relatively they're going to go down to compare to staying a...
Slightly lower forecast if we...
We're looking at the cheapest option here.
So
they all go up. Yeah.
New energy will go up 20% less than the wood.
Yes, yes. What we've made clear in the document under all 3 options is water charges will increase for all of the communities.
Okay.
So there's no shying away from that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Free. If you're speaking, you're on mute, Councillor.
Sorry about that.
Oh,
I'm just probably reiterating points made by maybe Councillor McNulty and Councillor Randall just now, but I think it's vitally important in the current climate that we have the accountability and the regulation really cleared out, and the legislation really clearly spelled out as to how we would deal with things if they didn't go well. Like that, basically, maybe I am risk averse, but we have been appalling, in my view, at our partnerships. You know, we're not getting a good deal out of Greater Wellington. We've had a lousy deal out of Wellington Water, and let's get Welly moving. It's a waste of money. You know, like we've not got good track record in this, and I mean, we just need to spell it out so people can see how much authority would they have, how much authority would we have under each of these scenarios to fix things if they went wrong. So I can't say that strongly enough.
you said it quite
the other
strongly,
thing is,
Sarah.
no, well, I'll say it even stronger if I had the chance. And I want to say it publicly as well. And I also want to ask publicly, what is the situation with our debt? Because we have low debt on our water. And I think that actually needs to be explained in the table as well. If we went as a sole ownership water organisation, although we would not have access to such a lot of new debt, we haven't got a lot of debt on our water assets. How would that be quantified under any of these scenarios? And what have the other partners actually agreed to? And can we put it out there in black and white, what has been agreed right now? Because I'm not sure myself what has been agreed, even though I've been asking about this for years.
So, Councillor Free, what has been agreed is that the AOG has agreed an in-principle transfer, a debt transfer that supports us in an equity adjustment. We haven't got a firm calculation for what that will be, because all the numbers will change depending on all the inputs, as we've talked about throughout this process. For modelling, we have used a figure of 750 million in terms of a debt transfer, and that simply keeps everything on an even keel between council, council only excluding Three Waters, but that is certainly not an indication of what the exact amount will be. It will change over time, and we can share with you information on that.
All right, so that was the debt question, and then the other questions about the regulation and the steps, the power that we would have or customers would have if they had complaints or something went really wrong under each model. Can we include something like that?
Thank you, Councillor. So just while Andrea was talking, so a couple of slides ahead of where we were when taking questions, we were looking to have the debt transfer conversation with you. So just to reiterate what Andrea has shared with you, I've just moved forward and put that slide on the screen for you.
Thank you. Thank you. But is that going into the consultation document?
No, because it's not a detail. So first of all, to Andrea's point, we don't have a final number. We have used a provisional number for modelling purposes, and so that's not a conversation that we'd be looking to have in the consultation document, no.
But it's not about the exact numbers, it's about the principle. Can we please make a note?
Yeah, I think in principle we've noted that this is only ever subject to having this equity payment. You know, that's a key decision for you, and that has been agreed by the AOG as well, and so that will be included. But the decision as to the amount of and those other points, that's not relevant to the community. What is relevant to the community is that our ratepayers are not left worse off.
Yep.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you.
Councillor, just going back to your first question around accountability. So in response, I would say two things, and I'm sorry to keep repeating, but the draft legislation really is quite a key point in this topic, and where that legislation lands and what powers it will give both councils and any CCO or water organisation. So, and we just cannot predict where that is going to land at the moment. So that would be the first point I'd make. But also understanding in the new world, the role of the Commerce Commission will be a lot greater, and the oversight that they will have and the expectations that they will have on water organisations and or councils will be a lot more than what we see today. So that is a role, and whilst I know there are some concerns about what that might look like, that is something we do need to, I think, anticipate and look forward to in terms of how that can help us should any situations arise like we find ourselves in today.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the chance to talk more offline as well. Thank you.
All right, I think that's brought us to the end of the questions. So if we carry on with the rest of the presentation.
About an hour ago, we started off and I said there was some, I'm just conscious of time because I really do want to talk to you about the survey question. So I'm just going to speed through this a little bit quicker. The current legislation requires us to include in our consultation certain information. So this information is in the consultation document. So this was just to give you a quick heads up about the key messages that we are including in the consultation document. So from a ratepayer's point of view, what happens with council rates? So they will be reduced through the removal of water revenue. What happens with water charges? What happens to debt and the fact that that is transferred? And what happens to the residual council debt position? And also levels of service. So talking to any changes that we expect around levels of service. So that is spelled out in the document. So I will just move through. We've talked about debt. So at this point, I would like to pause because I think there are some questions. And just before we delve into the survey question.
Councillor Pannett.
Will you look at the broader context because of getting rid of our assets, because then we'll also have a lesser asset base and less revenue for other services that we do provide?
Yes. Yes. Okay.
Seeing the detail.
Okay. Yeah.
Big question.
Okay. When we are going through consultation, the question that we ask our community is important, as you know, across the councils, so that we can aim to get a comparable position from our communities. We have agreed the main question to ask our communities. That main question being, which option do you believe is the best for delivering reliable drinking water, wastewater and stormwater services, and then spelling out the 3 options. Ideally, we would like that to be consistent across council, so really would hope that you wouldn't like to change that in any way, shape or form, but that is still something we're open to your feedback on. The question also then is, are there any additional questions you would like to ask? And in thinking about those questions, just why we would be asking any supplementary questions and what you would look to do with that information. So we could ask a whole bunch of questions, but if they're not really going to add value to the conversation, then it might be worth just leaving it as a simple conversation. Just as a starter for 10, what you could include is, how would you rate your experience? How confident are you that the preferred option will improve the quality and reliability? That might have been drafted before this week, so
we might already have a good sense of the answer, Margot.
So you might not want to include that. I appreciate that, but I think we do need to, I think this is an instance where taking into account the events of this week should help shape what we want to know from our community. So, any questions on the question?
Councillor Pennant.
Sorry, I'm going to be the fly in the ointment. The first question is seriously problematic. Like, yes, as one aspect, absolutely, but it doesn't talk about all the other issues around pollution, around resilience, which we have been working on, climate change, ownership, community involvement. So, for me, if we can't change that question, then it would be definitely appropriate to put below. And also, that question then, number 2, should be included. Like, let people fly with their concerns.
Councillor Rogers.
Yeah, I guess it's less of a well-framed question and more of a thought, was that the sort of first main question that you've got there, and then the sort of further questions, I guess 2 seems to be asking a very similar question to 1, but in a different way. And I get the feeling that if I had question 2 asked of those 3 options, I would be more informed than a selection of 1 option, if that makes sense.
I put myself on the list just to say, I'm not sure. The reason I guess I would have an issue with asking question 1 is because it's sort of an assumption, as an organisation, we know that there are serious concerns. And so it's sort of as if we don't have the view that we already have. So that would be why I wouldn't include a question like, the listed as number 1, that question. That's why I would be iffy on it. Councillor McNulty.
Yeah, I just think the consultation question's actually really good. It's sort of open, it leads through into discussion. It can't be seen as leading anyone down a garden path to a preferred outcome. I do think the 3 about suggestions is probably worth having in there as well, because there may be amendments or things we want to look at or bring to the Water Committee, AOG. But yeah, I think it's actually a really solid question. And yeah, the clear thing is no one can accuse that question is leading anyone down a particular outcome.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Foon.
Yeah, I guess one thing that's ringing out for me is the value for money question. And I think that while people want these services delivered absolutely seamlessly, they also are cognizant they've got to pay for them. So I don't know what the best question is or how we could open-end it, but I think that would feel fair to me to have something of that nature in the question.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Foon, and happy to talk some more on this one. This is one we did throw around for a while, and obviously we decided not to enter into that, mostly because under option 1 or 2, you're working on the proviso that a new entity will be established and there will be a board in place and the relationship between yourselves and water services changes dramatically. The ability to set water services and charges, etc., is then the responsibility of the new board. And so for council to put a question out that asks about value for money, etc., is not necessarily something we can follow through on, because that will be the board's responsibility. Now, there's always things we can include in the statement of expectations, but we wanted to try to not lead the expectation or set the expectation that that will be within council's control entirely. Yeah.
Could we ask a question that I'm just trying to think that, you know, when it comes to changing the water services delivery model, what are the most important factors for people when it comes to the decision?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like value for money could be one of the things. Like I'm really interested to hear, is value for money, is kind of accountability, is the environment, you know, how those things kind of rate. And I guess I'm talking about a relatively complex question, but I am interested in that view. Yes, Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, thank you much if it's already been said. My suggestion, was mainly around number 2, how confident are you? And the suggestion was to reframe that to what would give you confidence, but I like the chair's suggested words there. My only partai is, and I know we're all doing this on different timelines, but are there any big questions that we're aware of that our other partners might be consulting on? Because ultimately also the questions you ask do frame a bit of the discussion as well.
Not that I'm aware of. These proposed supplementary or draft supplementary questions have been shared by another council, and so we have blatantly stolen them for the purpose of this discussion. Whether they land on those or not is still part of their decision making. I'm not aware of Greater Wellington having landed on their bulk water supply question. I think they might be stepping back from that. So not that I'm aware of, Councillor, yeah.
Councillor Randall.
Yes, I see where you're going with this. I like the idea of putting in the questions, like especially question 1, and I think question 2 is fine as well. I just think, I was wondering if you could consider putting in a question that a new entity would want to put in when they are measuring their own performance about customer, and it could be value for money, but it could be just quality of service, because and so doing such a question would it may give us a bit of an insight into measurement of where Wellington Water's at, but also maybe helpful for them to baseline when they get going, to know that we've already asked that question now, just in terms of helping them go forward.
Okay.
Just so that people can have their say through this process, and then when they get going, they can say, well, that's the sort of question we would keep asking when we get going as we track our establishment and then the improvement in service.
Happy to have that feedback and talk to you some more about that, Councillor, if you'd like.
Sure.
Yep.
Pauiwi Hohaya.
Yeah, thank you. I just looking at that first question and kind of picking up on your comments, Madam Chair, I wonder whether another way to frame it might be, which option do you prefer and why, so that you're open to give your full range of views from an environmental perspective, whatever it might be. Just a thought. I'm not an expert.
No, appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Winera, online, you have a question?
Yeah, just a small piece of feedback, namely that I think it would perhaps be better to avoid including supplementary questions that only related to the preferred option, just in the interests of avoiding garden path bleeding, as it was put earlier. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
I think that's the end of the comments on that section.
Great.
We got anything else?
Good news is, probably more for you than me.
Okay.
Only one more slide. So this is really just to clarify where to from here in terms of the consultation document. So in terms of the timeline, so you will email this to you as soon as we finish here. So I'd be grateful if you could get your feedback through to me by end of day on Friday. I will make myself available to you basically from here until the end of the week. If you'd like to have a conversation, I'm happy to sit down and talk to you, have a phone call, however. Just if you've got concerns, questions, queries, especially as you read through the document. As we've already referred to, and this is the chair's preempting earlier, so if there is conflicting feedback, we'll just need to work through that. So I guess it's really what I'm saying is there's no promises that every piece of feedback will be included, but we will do our best. My goal is to make sure we have that coherent story that's easy to understand. So that's what I'm looking to achieve. And then you will receive your committee papers early next week with the consultation document, so seeking adoption of that at your meeting, the LTP committee meeting on the 18th of March. And that's where we're heading to before we start consultation on the 20th. Okay, thank you.
Is there any questions about that process? No? Okay. I'd just like to, again, thank you, Margot, for all of the work that I know has gone into this. We are hugely appreciative. We are now going to take a 5-minute break, toilet break, cup of tea, and then we will return. That's the end of the live streaming, and then we will have another session about recent issues at Wellington Water. Thank you.